this continued erasure of Indigenous peoples and their rights. It reflects on our relationship with the land and the continuous process of colonization that deeply impacts activist work. It demonstrates respect that this is Indigenous land and Indigenous people have rights to this land. And it recognizes that treaties were made, broken, some were never made. Rights were stripped and denied by using centuries of laws and policies. For those of us who work in and with community, I encourage you to learn about Indigenous peoples, their history and culture, and to ensure that our work is grounded in decolonizing approaches and practices, and build relationships with Indigenous people and honor the responsibilities in those relationships. Now, COVID-19 is exacerbating structural inequities for marginal communities everywhere. But know that many Indigenous communities still do not have clean running water and indoor plumbing. So they will be gravely impacted by these inequities and with collateral damage, especially for healthcare, food security, and education, making them more vulnerable, particularly those further north and some on reserves. So I urge us all in our everyday lives to grasp opportunities to contribute to the 94 calls to action issued by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples. Really briefly, I want us to just acknowledge this. Amidst all that's going on and not take away from it, as we stand in solidarity with and in protest against the police murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd in the United States, as well as Regis Koczynski-Paquet, who fell to death in the presence of Toronto police officers. Let us never forget our long history of violence and killings of Black queer people globally, and to include the recent murder by police of Tony McDade, a Black trans man in Tallahassee, Florida. On another note, something unrelated but relevant. I'm bringing to your attention the passing of Dr. Ron Simmons, whose death may have gone unnoticed, but I want us to remember, especially as Black gay men. Ron was an African-American gay educator and fierce activist dedicated to Black lives and HIV prevention. If you didn't know about him before, I urge you and do Google him. He was known as a champion for his body of transformative work. Thanks for the opportunity for sharing that. So again, I welcome you to this town hall meeting and to ground this conversation. The topic is impact of COVID-19 on Black gay men's lives. And to introduce this session and its speakers, I'll turn it over to Sebastio. Sebastio, go ahead.
Oh, hey. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sebastio, or you can see on my screen, it says Twisted MM. The MM stands for Miyake Mugler. That is my community name. So you can call me either one, but I don't mind if you call me Sebastio or Twisted, so it's all good. My job is to introduce the event. So as you guys all know, we are here to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on Black gay men's lives. This is an event that was put together by different people in the community who are all connected through Black Gay Men's Network of Ontario. So this is an organization that was started by the community in Ontario to build the network for Black gay men in Ontario. So we're doing this conversation because we feel like we have not had any conversations as a community since the lockdown began, which was pretty much 3 months ago now. So we are gonna break that silence and start having conversations about how we're dealing with it, come up with different ways of coping with it, also discussing the realities of being in a lockdown, how it affects our mental health. And of course, as Eric also just mentioned, talking about what's going on in the world today with the racial injustices that we are seeing, that we've been seeing for the last however long. and how the world is reacting today. So all of that will come up today. I'm going to reiterate to everybody that if you are not speaking, or if you do not want to be seen on the Facebook stream, please turn off your camera, because if you have your camera on, you will be seen on the stream. And we're streaming the event to Facebook. So there will be people that will be able to see your face if your camera's on, even if you're not speaking at the moment. And please, if you are on the Zoom, please keep your microphone on mute, just so that everybody is able to hear the person that is speaking at the time. All right. So yeah, that's just some housekeeping for everybody here. And I'm going to introduce our three panelists. So the way that it's going to work is that we're going to have questions that will be geared towards the panelists. If anybody is in the group chat or on the Facebook that has questions, enter it in the chat. And after the conversation, Lance is going to take over and do the Q&A section. All right, so our first panelist, Bolahan Olarewaju, sorry for the pronunciation. GB is a first-year medical student at the University of British Columbia. He completed his previous degrees in Guelph, Ontario. As a queer Black immigrant, he has a keen interest in health access and equity for marginalized people, including youth, immigrants, queer, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. He applied this interest into interdisciplinary advocacy work and research as the coordinator of international programs at the University of Guelph, and more recently as the Vancouver coordinator for the National Gay, Bisexual, and Queer Men's Health Study Engage. While completing his medical education, he continues his advocacy work as the vice chair of the Youth Co HIV and Hepatitis C Society in British Columbia, and as inaugural chair of the Black Medical Students Association of Canada. So we have a very decorated panelist. Please welcome GB. That's our first panelist. You'll get to say a little bit more in a second. You know, we're not gonna do no waves right now. Our second panelist is I actually met him through the ballroom scene, actually. A legend in the ballroom scene who is one of the only few people that's alive keeping the bizarre category alive. And that's actually how I met him at first. Then I went to New York City a couple years later for the Heritage Ball and found out that he was one of the people organizing the Heritage Ball in New York, which is one of the biggest balls in New York in the summer. And the Heritage Ball is also tied into NYC Black Pride, and he is the executive director of NYC Black Pride. So welcome Lee Soldier Simmons to the panel. And he's gonna be our NYC representative. Thank you so much for making the time to come out. If you guys do not know, he's very connected and does a lot of advocacy work in New York too. And we actually are kind of blocking him a little bit from doing some work right now. So thank you for making the time to speak to us, because we really need your perspective, and everybody will understand why in a second. So thank you, Lee. And our third panelist that we have is another good friend, Rodney. Rodney, I don't know how you pronounce your name, but I'm gonna say, Diverless. I hope I'm right. So Rodney is a Haitian-Canadian multi-hyphenate artist and artivist who uses the body and voice as sites to host movement, text, rhythm, and protest that weave in ancestral, diasporic, and queer narratives of life and freedom. I like how that's written. Beyond his artistic practice, he moonlights as an organizer, a co-founder of Black Lives Matter in Canada. His work imagines the radical blackening of the public sphere. And he also is now working in a mental health agency and working in another capacity. So shout out to you, Rodney, working across boundaries. And thank you so much for coming, because we need your perspective too. So thank you. Welcome our three panelists, and I am going to pass it on to them, I think. Welcome, you guys. You guys can mute your phones now, and I'm gonna mute mine.
Great, thank you so much, Twisted. I guess I could go first. I think that was the plan. So thank you for inviting me to this. It's really incredible to be a part of this group. I don't think I've been a part of a discussion with this many Black gay men ever. You know, I've been in fun social kind of situations, but this is new for me, and I'm really happy that it's happening. You know, one of the things that we were asked to talk about is how COVID is, and the associated social distancing and isolation is impacting us as Black gay men. And I think it's important to ask, who is a Black gay man? We aren't a monolith. So like my perspective is going to be my perspective. I certainly can't speak for all Black gay men. But when I think about COVID, it's been an interesting time. Honestly, I count myself among the lucky ones because, I have a live-in partner, I'm a student, I have access to financial capital. I mean, it is going to be debt, but by virtue of my social capital as a medical student, I'm okay financially. I have the luxury of being distracted by schoolwork at this point in time. So the impact has not been the heaviest on me personally, but I know that it's not the same for everybody else. Personal challenge for me has been worrying about my family back in Nigeria because, this pandemic is all over the world, and the folks on the continent, because of the histories of colonialism and all sorts of things that have been going on, may not always have the same, like it's not easy to apply the same sort of strategies that we apply here to places like that. I remember my family was telling me that they tried to do the whole lockdown thing, but that doesn't make sense in a community where people need to get out day to day, and make their living and feed themselves. So they were telling us about a lot of violence that was happening, people breaking into homes, and it was really terrifying. So that's a personal challenge for me for sure. And I think the biggest challenge personally is the loss of social space and physical community, not being able to spend time with friends as much as I would like to, do the things that help me remove the stressors that come from all sorts of places in the world. But again, as I said, I'm very privileged, and I'm aware it's not the case for many Black men. It's not the same for those who were considered essential workers, but prior to this did not have a livable wage. And now everybody is saying, "Oh, you're essential, and we're applauding you." But you got to give them a livable wage. It's not the same for migrant workers who are putting their health at risk, and have been doing so for a very long time to put food on our tables. So I'm also acutely aware of the challenges that gay men face. It's been highlighted by researchers, and to also be a Black man in our current society, that climate comes with compounding challenges ranging from mental health to loss of safe spaces. Some of the areas that I think would be very, very important to mention, of course, the mental health impact. We're already disproportionately impacted by mental health challenges due to our intersectional identities and the stigma and the discrimination that comes with that. But then COVID also poses this new challenge with isolation. Online community is not the same if you're sheltering at home alone, and then of course what's going on in the world right now with the killings of Black folks at the hands of the police, like that recent trauma makes things even worse. Anxiety is going to go up, depression is going to go up, and these are the things that we need to be worried about as a community. Access to healthcare and community centers, places that we used to gather, they're not there anymore because of the restrictions and because they're considered non-essential, but these are very, very important for our health. And for some folks, safe spaces are not available anymore. Many people have had to move back home to homes that may have not been the most welcoming places for them as gay Black men. So that's how we got to think about that. And of course, the financial burden. So yeah, there is a disproportionate impact for Black gay men for COVID. I just count myself among the lucky ones who doesn't have to deal with a lot of these things, but I know others may be able to speak to some of those things. And then in light of COVID and the recent killings, the first point I'd like to make is, it's very frustrating. It's extremely unacceptable, of course, but this is not something new. Most of all, I'm angry. I'm not surprised by what's happening, but I'm very, very angry. It's not a new phenomenon because the world has been, I get very emotional when I talk about this, but the world is so rife with racism. It's been there for so long. Even this morning, we heard about Chantal Moore, an Indigenous woman who was killed by police during a wellness check. This is in Canada. It's happening. And people keep talking about it all the time. Like, oh, Canada is this weird post-racial society. These things only happen in the States, but I don't know what's in the water here that people think we're this utopia, but it's happening. It keeps happening. The second point is this racism. It's been a disease. It's been eating away at our core, but for centuries. That fear that automatically causes folks to see others, those of us with Black skin, as a threat. Like it's, we're talking about a pandemic, COVID here, but like racism is a pandemic that's been here for the longest time. And so, like I said, I'm not surprised. I'm just really tired and angry. Last week I had to take a step away from everything for a few days. When I heard about George Floyd and then Regis Kurchinski Paquet in Toronto, I had to take away the step from everything because like mental health is so important, and it was already teetering for me because of our new COVID reality. And the previous news about Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, I just didn't want to push myself over the edge. And I can imagine many of the Black folks felt the same way. And then again with the killing of Chantal Moore this morning. And it's kind of, I'm glad to see that there's a lot of protests happening right now. But to be honest, with the sheer scale of what's happening, while it's inspiring, like I'm a bit skeptical because moments like this bring about a lot of virtue signaling. It says, oh, Black Lives Matter, put the photo frames on your Facebook profile, the black rectangles. I see all that stuff, but it's not sustainable. It doesn't actually do anything, and nobody's actually doing the work to dismantle these systems that have created these problems. But that being said, I think the COVID pandemic has offered us a really unprecedented opportunity to make some change. It's like there's this huge pause button that's been put on the world to say, look, let's fix the mistakes that we've already made, because these current systems that we have are proving unsustainable now. Everything seems to be crumbling, and now a lot of people, specifically I'll say allies and would-be allies, have a lot more time on their hands. So they can really show up, join these protests and the things that we've been doing for ages. They have time to read the critical race theory resources we keep telling them to read, but they don't actually prioritize. Black folks have the opportunity now to connect with each other. Like I speak specifically in Canada, across the country, so we can strategize, so we can organize, so we can collaborate in ways that our previous day-to-day grind prevented us from doing. And then with organizations, making public statements about racism and all of that, now is the time that we need to strategize ways to hold them accountable. So I think this is a really important opportunity. And then in terms of fostering resistance and resilience for Black gay men, I think what I can say is take care of yourself and your loved ones. That's the best thing I can say for now. Take time for yourself to do the things that you need to do to cope. I know for many, the options of connecting in person are not available right now, but virtual connection can still have some benefits. And, for those of us, for example, like me, who don't directly need all the help that has been offered to us, a lot of people reach out and say, is there anything I can do for you? How can I help you? I can't imagine what you're feeling right now. I think keep a list of organizations that could use the help and send those links to those people and say, look, I'm okay. Not all Black people are dealing with the same things. We're not a monolith, but there are people who need this help. So send those links to those people. COVID has put so many businesses and organizations in jeopardy, and they could use that help right now. I think it's important to rant. It's important to raise your voice, be vocal about the injustices we're seeing, if you feel safe to do so. Public protesting right now, it may put you and your communities at risk because we're also dealing with a pandemic and a health pandemic that doesn't, knows no boundaries and seems to be killing us at a greater risk already. And it may be an unpopular position or opinion to take, but like perhaps it's not the time to expose our communities to a virus that's disproportionately already killing us, and also risk more police brutality. Like put those white folks out there. I'm sorry, I think that's important. However, if it is something that you feel that you need to do to resist, I think you should do so with care. Try to remain anonymous, wear a mask, keep your distance from others. As a future health professional, I can't really say you got to wash your hands. You got to, monitor yourself for symptoms in the weeks that come, so that we're not, continuing to spread a disease that has already been going unchecked in our communities as well. And then collectively look out for each other. I'm so glad this is happening. This is wonderful. As I said, I haven't been in a discussion with so many other Black gay men, and I'm in Vancouver. We have something similar here, but there's about 12 of us. So it's not really that much. So this is very comforting to be able to be on this forum and talk. And I applaud all the organizers that keep these groups going, especially in this difficult time. And then if nothing exists where you are, maybe it's the time to form something. Get on those apps and talk to the other Black guys you see and say, hey, how you doing? Check on them, and maybe you can start something in your organization. And so yeah, those are my word vomit thoughts, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, GB. So I guess next we will hear from Lee. Again, Lee, you can share your perspective and share your story because nobody, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, there's a lot going on, so there's a lot to unpack at this moment. But for those who don't know me, I started out as a visual performance artist, entertainer here in New York. I guess I've been performing since I was a kid, child actor and stuff, and I've used growing up firsthand and watching so many friends pass away and die during the HIV crisis during the 80s. And it began to motivate me to become more active and get more involved in different things. So I have, besides being an entertainer and performer, I decided to get more involved within my own community. I had to go through my own struggles with my own identity and um, and accepting being part of the community. So I think it kind of, I always say to young people, I wish I had found myself at a younger age than older in life. But so be it. But anyway, I organize and run Black Pride here in New York, and I run it more as a all year round organization, and just not about organizing festival of events during Black Pride weekend. And I connect with a lot of the community-based organizations here in New York. I support them in their groups and events and things that they do. I also work and sit on coalitions. There's a LGBT, Black and Latino LGBT coalition that I sit on, the borough presidents, the governors, the mayors. I sit on a lot of these committees just to make sure that there's always a person of color's voice, a Black voice that's at the table when we're having these conversations. I think it's very important. And I'm also an advocate for also bringing into youth, young people into the space. I think oftentimes we neglect having them at the table, so that things that are impacting them, we should not be making decisions of that. And also within my Black Pride organization, I try to make sure that my committees and my groups are diverse. I'm not a Black gay man trying to decide what a lesbian event should be. I'm not a Black gay man trying to decide what a trans event should be. I try to make sure that there's always representation at the table for us to create these things. Around COVID, there's a lot here happening here in New York, and I'm very concerned about a lot of things. First of all, I was infected with the coronavirus. I was hospitalized. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. So it completely took me down within a matter of 2 days. I mean, from having tubes down my throat, respirator, oxygen pumps, and just a whole host of other things. Obviously, I think COVID impacts everyone differently, depending on if you have other health things going on within your body. So I'm open about saying that I'm also HIV positive, which also steers a lot of the activism that I do here in advocacy work. And I am a 3-time cancer survivor. So I think that probably impacted why the coronavirus was, it was so much going on for me. I didn't necessarily think that I was going to make it. But again, anyone that knows me knows I have pulled through deeper situations when I was dealing with cancer and chemo and radiation. So, but I'm very concerned here for my community here in New York around the coronavirus. The fact of being, having the community in quarantine and being locked down when there's so many access to things, everyone doesn't equally have access. And I think that's the word that I most want to use, is access. I am lucky. I can say that I can pick up a phone, or I could text someone and say, I needed such and such when I was in isolation, or when I was here in my home quarantine while I'm letting the virus run its course. But there were so many folks who didn't have that. When you talk about the United States here, 40 million people are unemployed. Those numbers are high here in New York. So them not being able to pay their rent, shelters were closed. So all these youth shelters were shut down as to stop the spread of the coronavirus. Where did those kids go? So I was constantly raising those questions. And then the police, obviously policing the areas, trying to get everyone off the street and get everything in lockdown. Where are these people going, right? Access to food, right? Everyone getting tested. Today, everyone's walking around with masks and gloves and doing all these things, but in the heat of the situation that was going down, everything was happening so quickly. It had me extremely concerned. Today, they're pushing everyone to get tested, and they're asking us within the community to help us to locate people to take jobs and be tracers, so to speak, is what the government, New York State governor is calling them. And I'm sure in different areas across the United States, they're doing the same thing, which is basically these tracers are supposed to, as they're testing folks in their community, supposed to ask these questions around who were you in contact with. That's problematic to me a little bit, because at the end of the day, you don't really know when you contacted COVID or how you contacted. You start getting the symptoms and you get sick. And some people, majority of people, are asymptomatic. So a lot of the times they're not even finding out until they start getting fevers or two they get tested. So how can you necessarily list who you've been in contact with? All you're really going to be able to identify is from the point that you know you've been tested positive for COVID, who you might have been around. So there's a lot of extreme issues here. Housing is extremely expensive here in New York, so a majority of people, to pay their rent and stuff, they live with roommates in situations. I have personally, being the father of a house, I have kids that are leaving New York and traveling to live back with their parents or back to family members that was unsafe spaces from them in the beginning, but they have no choice. It's either do that or be homeless. And that's depressing. And then there is the key of mental illness, isolation, being isolated for 3 weeks, and not being able to have, again, access to food, access to just, some people, just conversation, because everybody's living their life. Everybody was in a state of quarantine. So sometimes you start to feel like, I might want to call A, B, and C, but I don't want to interrupt them in whatever they're doing to get through this situation. And so it also enacts a lot of depression within our community that people already have already. So being alone and isolated, I think, has definitely increased. I'm going to say that the phone calls that I get and emails I get, also I'm seeing a rise in domestic violence. That's with those who have partners. Now necessarily having to be quarantined with somebody for the last month, day in and day out. Are they really starting to learn a person and realize, trying to get along and arguments, and how do you deal with it when you really don't have a way to escape and leave that person? So we're seeing huge numbers, increases in domestic violence. And the suicide hotlines that I connect to have been all reported back, saying that people of color the numbers for people of color around calling, saying that they feel like they want to commit suicide, are starting to rise. So there's so many factors, so many things that's impacting Black gay men here in New York around COVID. And I'm not necessarily sure what some of the cures are going to be, because even as we're starting to open up and give us access back to supermarkets and restaurants and spaces, and I think people are rushing to get back to those things, life is not going to be the same. COVID is not disappearing. It is not going away. I don't think that people are listening to doctors and understanding that You should be wearing a mask. That's a change in life. Now to walk around with a mask all the time, or to get access to places, I think it's going to be an extremely difficult adaptation for a lot of people. A lot of the safe spaces here in New York, nightlife in New York is suffering. All of these clubs and places and spaces that we did have identified are all closing. They're shut down, and they're considered to be part phase 4. New York State has divided opening up things into 4 phases. And so nightlife and some of those type of spaces that young people utilize is part of phase 4. We haven't even entered phase 1 yet. So I think that they are choosing to do things that are risky, just to get out. It's hot. So that worries me that we're about to start to respark new infections again. And I don't think that no one is really looking at how it is impacting HIV positive Black gay males. In the reports that I get directly from the governor, it kind of breaks it down to how many people have passed away in hospitals and then versus nursing homes. So I'm going to touch on that because we know that there's no distinct treatment for COVID, right? We know that there's nothing that they can give you to avoid you from getting it from someone else. And we know that there's no cure. So when these people are hospitalized, or when I was hospitalized, I had to really understand that really all that was happening for me is that they are treating symptoms, right? So if they're just treating your symptoms, once they've treated what they can treat, they are releasing you. And depending on the state of your condition, some people get released into rehabs and to nursing homes, and then some are being sent home to ride out the wave of the coronavirus. That's just to let it run its course. This is where I say that for a lot of Black gay men to be in isolation and not have access or money for food and all the necessities that they need, they're suffering at home. This is when depression starts to kick in. And then I think people misread the news when the news saying they're sending 400 people went home from this hospital. Okay, they went home from the hospital, but they were not cured because there is no cure. You know, some of them might have been in the hospital for a while and maybe they rode out the virus while they were in the hospital, but the majority of people are being sent home to deal with the virus in isolation by themselves. It's all problematic. And it's upsetting to me that I don't think we also take an acknowledgement about those that were already dealing with HIV and AIDS. How are they getting their meds? How are they eating and doing different things? I'm going to say that I have been working with a network of people who we have been all kind of helping each other with delivering meals to each other. I'm lucky that my kids took care of me when I couldn't get up and I couldn't walk. They were taking turns to come and bring me meals and shop for me and get the things I have. But I'm lucky. That's not everybody. So we're not talking about that. And then we're not also dealing with our trans brothers and sisters, but I'm sure that's probably another deeper conversation. So today we're dealing with Black gay men, but I do want to mention trans because I think with everything that's going on with the marching and saying Black Lives Matter, that we neglect to say all Black Lives Matter. And if anyone's been watching the videos that are going across America, you know that we've just watched 2 trans women being viciously, brutally beaten by a crowd of people while they were out protesting, mind you, and people stood by and watched. So that's also disheartening. But again, for myself, I think I'm most impacted is that I feel like I'm triggered right now. I feel like I'm hurting. I feel like there's no voice, right? There's no voice for us sometimes in this movement. So I feel like I'm triggered because I feel like I need to be that voice. I may be tired and sick and trying to heal, but who's speaking up for us? There's no one saying, hey, if we're a part of this movement, something called Black Lives Matter, then it needs to speak to all Black lives, right? We need to be visible and be a part of it. And for so long, again, I'm coming from a different generation where, you know, let's talk about ballroom, where we talked about realness. Realness was a way of life. It wasn't just a category. You wanted to be able to come out your house, wherever you lived, and walk down the street and not get beaten and not have anybody look at you and distinguish you and point you out. So to today, I love the freedoms that a lot of the young people have, because you're able to self-identify. You can create your identity and live within your truth, however you decide to label that. But I think the older generation, we still hold on to a lot of that. We're still not necessarily comfortable. Nobody walked up to us and asked us, what is your pronoun? I'm still getting used to that, you know what I mean? And changing the language, using words like queer, as a lot of people identify with queer. For me growing up, those were words that were made to dehumanize us. You know, they called us faggots and queers to dehumanize us. So now to turn it around and use it as this umbrella word, I'm still struggling with that. Even though I'm here to support the younger generation, I still struggle with something that has become to be negative to me to embrace that word. So when I'm hearing events and saying we're having a Black queer event and we want to talk about this, sometimes I shudder, but I know it's meant to be inclusive, but I necessarily don't identify with that. And that's a freedom within itself, to be able to understand that young people have made these choices around identifying and how they identify. So yes, I'm triggered. I'm triggered at the marches. I'm triggered. I've gone out to march because I feel like when people see me, the first thing they identify me is I'm Black. There's no hiding that, I'm Black. And then from there, they will learn more about if I identify as a gay man or however else I choose to identify, or state that I identify. So I feel that this movement, I have kids, I have biological kids, I have a son, and I'm scared of anytime the police comes up and the police wants to stop him. I have to tell my son, don't argue with them, do what they ask. You know what I mean? Don't confront them. It's a different generation today. And these kids are tired of turning the other cheek. They're tired of the Martin Luther King approach to, you know, when you see pictures and images of them sitting in the Woolworth at the diner and people were throwing ice cream and things on them not responding, peaceful response. This generation is not for that. And so I think it's great, but it also scares me. It scares me every time one of my kids call me up and say, I'm going down here and there, you know, I'm scared. You can't help but be scared. I get up to go out, but I'm an older man. So I'm nervous for myself just as well, because you never know what these crowds are going to trigger, and you are there at being a part of something. But I do it because I know my voice is necessary. I do it sometimes because I feel like I need to be that space sometimes to bring the attitudes down, to calm a situation, and to really have some dialogue around what are we really doing? What are the goals? I feel that's a big thing we don't necessarily talk about. Testing. What's the goal? For COVID, you want to do the tracing. Okay, and everybody gets tested. What's the goal? Where's the goal? Where are we going? Where are we moving towards? Black Lives Matter. We're marching in protest. And I love that it's spontaneous. I love that the whole world is starting to respond. You see it in Greece. I'm seeing it in London. I'm seeing it in Paris. Yesterday, I got some emails, some people to send them some stuff that were all the way in New Zealand. That's amazing. But at the end of the day, what are we all fighting for? Where are we going with this? What is the plan? If we're not talking about legislation on the federal, state, and local levels, changing what we're doing, we're wasting our time. If we don't enact some change at the end of this, we're wasting our time. And lastly, I'm going to say, I think that the whole thing for me, I guess where I get emotional, is that this is all happening at the same time that this pandemic is happening around the world. Is this movement now happening for us around acts of racism. We're also seeing natural disasters happening here in the United States, these storms and hurricanes. You start to feel like, you know, things are happening in biblical proportions. And I'm not necessarily religious, but it's moving when you sit back and you think about all these things. I even had a conversation with environmentalists saying, look at the earth starting to fight to clear up itself. They were showing me images over India and other countries that normally have smog and fog over them, how the skies are starting to clear up. So you kind of feel like, is the earth setting us up for a reset, and us as human beings, are we missing that opportunity to kind of reset our lives as well and set a course for a better way for us to live amongst each other, and we're missing that opportunity? So I just want to kind of put that out there. I think as Black gay men, we're missing we have an opportunity to connect with each other on all different types of levels, and to have a real conversation as to say, what do we want and where are we going?
Thank you so much, Lee. Ooh. Thank you so much, Lee, for being so open and so vulnerable. Rodney, are you there?
Yes, right here.
All right, yes. So, so thank you. And before we even move on to Rodney, I just want to make a statement real quick, because I know, and I hope my microphone is being clear. I know that Lee is from New York City, and people might be having the question about, oh, but he's not from Toronto. A lot of social trends and a lot of things that we see as Black gay men in Canada, especially in Toronto, there are a lot of these trends start in New York City, right? They're not, it's not just here in Toronto, if that makes sense. These things happen in other Black gay communities as well, and that's what unites us all around the world. So when we hear these experiences coming in from New York, it's kind of like a warning flag, if that makes sense, as to what we should do, what kind of things might be coming our way, so how we should prepare ourselves. So I'm very glad that you spoke, Lee, to us here in Canada, because trust me, we are going through a lot of those racial injustices that you might be going through over there. I don't know if the media is sharing that with you guys, what we're going on here, but trust and believe we're going through a lot of police shit too during this pandemic. And we are trying to organize and do all these things as a nation and as a Black men, well, as Black people around the world while this pandemic is happening. So that's even more reason why you should be on this call, because this thing is not local to Toronto, it's a worldwide issue. So I'm very appreciative that you made the time to be on this call. Rodney, we'll move on to you.
Cool. Likewise, I'm also very thankful to have had a chance to hear you, Lee, and I'm thankful to you as well, GB, to be able to hear your perspectives and sort of figure out what I can offer to help and complement that. Likewise to what you said, Twisted, I mean, Black folks are having this conversation globally, and it's not just me speaking meta by saying that. I mean, literally, the same injustices that we're seeing that are given to us in the news are actually also happening to Black folks in Brazil, in Canada, in the UK, Black folks in Australia, all over, really, in the continent, in the Caribbean. So the sort of global conversation that we're seeing right now is in part because people are able to look at the experiences of what's happening to young people or to people in general in Minneapolis and in LA and in New York and contextualize it to their location and think about the favelas of Rio and thinking about Ghana and thinking about Haiti and thinking about the places that anywhere we are in the world where we continually are statistics and numbers and anomalies and marginalized. It's interesting because we're in such a moment right now, and every day of my life is every day of the last 4 days I've been talking about this moment. And when I saw my calendar reminder for this, I was like, oh, what is this about? COVID. And it's as if as if the last 4 days has sort of, COVID is just the undercurrent to all of this inflection moment. It is still sort of that's creeping, menacing threat and reality that is underneath our entire lives and has been underneath our entire lives for the last 3 months. And I haven't contracted COVID, and I haven't experienced it personally, but have seen the ways that it's ravaged my immediate community in a variety of different ways. One of the things that I sort of wanted to offer, I mentioned earlier I wasn't going to speak meta, but I think that in this sort of moment, I find it useful to sort of take myself out of this where I'm feeling right now, to think of the bigger picture. And to me, I don't think it's a coincidence. It is, well, I know it's not a coincidence that right now it is Black communities that are out and that are raging during COVID, during a pandemic. I think that all of the ingredients sort of for resistance are there. I think, and I can speak for myself, there's particularly in folks that I know that are in my friends groups, there's a sense of, there's a sense of, it's a borderline despair, but it's a sort of like it's a sort of Afro-pessimistic, we have nothing to lose, a mix of those perspectives mixed in together. I think that wherever we look, whether or not you want to talk about COVID or this protest that's happening, Black folks, we feel like we're losing from wherever. So if COVID is not going to, if we're already, if before COVID, we were already anomalous in terms of how much we're impacted by pre-existing health conditions. Being Black was a pre-existing condition. Even before COVID, the healthcare infrastructure was already failing us. Before COVID, we already had been warning after warning after warning after warning after warning that 1 in 5 Canadians' jobs are precarious. And most of those precarious jobs are occupied by folks that look like us, let's be honest here. There had been warning after warning after warning that the labor market could not sustain an emergency. There had been warning and warning and warning about the housing market in these big cities and how inaccessible they are and how precarious people were in their homes, unable to think of a future, unable to move beyond their situations, facing evictions, et cetera, et cetera. That was before COVID. We are already stretched to our limits before COVID. And for many of us, we were able to continue on in life, right? For many of us, the ability of, is particularly in Canada, the anti-Black racism here is so insidious. It's an undercurrent. It's so nuanced that often it requires us to engulf. It requires us to implode. It requires us to take it in and feel that in our bodies. And I think COVID in this time and all of it coming together really, I ultimately can't fault Black folks for responding at this moment. I can't fault Black folks' responses at the moment because no matter where you go, we're being hurt. I'm not a parent, but the amount of my Black parents that have just had no options in this moment during COVID. Our schools are already chronically underfunded. And if the quality of education while I'm at schools like that, imagine what it's like now that it's virtual, no resources. And now my mother works at a nursing home and my father works at a bank, both have pre-existing conditions. I couldn't imagine if they had young pre-existing health conditions like diabetes, like high blood pressure, like many of our peoples. So I couldn't imagine if they had younger kids, if all of us were in high school or in elementary school or middle school and needed to be homeschooled, how would they, because they're both essential workers, how would it be possible for them to have children, to be parents, and to also be workers? We know that in our long-term homes, a lot of the workers are facing the crisis in long-term care homes is exacerbated by the fact that who are working at long-term care homes, y'all? It's the Haitian women, it's the Jamaican women, it's our people, that are having to take hits from every angle. And I have to, there's a part of me that has to recognize that at any point in our entire history as a people, or as a makeshift people, since the North Atlantic slave trade, at any point in the last 400, 500 years, these movements rise up, these inflection points come out, in part out of a desire not to see our futures completely get ripped apart by all crises. I feel like 2020 to me, all of this is sort of an indictment on these systems. And I'm so happy you mentioned a GB around the systems failing, because it is system failure. Black folks are being asked to protest, not just for Black Lives Matter. If we have to be real honest here, the people on the streets as well are protesting a failed political system, are protesting a failed healthcare system, are protesting a failed economic labor system that they are desperately impacted by. So to me, it's the sort of moment that we're seeing right now is really the Black sort of cause being used as a vehicle to talk about the rest of our frustrations that we have, not just with the police, with every other system. If your systems, and if my body right now as an artist, as a movement artist, I'm acutely aware of how important my systems need to function together. And if one part of my system, let's say my eating, is off for a week, my entire body is off. My entire work is impacted. So if we're thinking of extrapolating that in a more meta sense, thinking about ourselves as a society, multiple systems, multiple organs are failing at the exact same time, impacting the same people disproportionately. How would you continue working? Nobody's working. How would you continue moving on in life? Like, there's a sort of, I think that this moment is inevitable. And I think that this indictment of a system is an opportunity for us to stretch the levels of our imagination to imagine a world that is different than this. When they talk about the new normal, when we keep hearing that in the news of the new normal, we have to ensure that this new normal is a world that we dream up and we imagine. And it sounds like, normally if I'm saying dreaming up and imagining, it sounds flippy, wishy-washy. But y'all, like, if you asked me 3 months ago, can all of these nations create a social welfare program in 3 weeks? I would tell you that's impossible. You can have your qualms about whether they're good or the CRB is great or not. Obviously, it's piloted. It needs to go through. It's not going to be perfect. But the sort of responses, if you ask me, can these countries liquidate $2 trillion and like that? The money is there. The systems are there. The sort of structures to create the sort of changes that we've been asking for beyond my generation, beyond even your generation, Lee, or parents or grandparents or great grandparents. The work has been there. Academics have been theorizing about how to defund the police, how to create alternative community systems, how to create a more robust community health system that prevents illness rather than responds to it. The work is already there. I think it's now up to us to remind folks that the work is there and use this moment to get the changes that we know we're gonna need. I was speaking to someone today and I was just doing a calculation of two things. I mean, I went to a rally last weekend that were youth led. So young people, folks younger than me that were out on the streets, so frustrated, rage filled. And I met one of these early 20s university student who's now not maybe thinking of not going back to school because of COVID. And she talked to me about how she saw me at a protest back when I had blue hair in like 2013 when she was in like middle school. So she sort of talked about, like, to hear from this person that's out now as a full-grown adult, to see the sort of span in her eyes of how nothing really has changed since we've been, and that's in my lifetime it's a short span. It made me think about, I'm 30 now and I've been talking about police violence for 15 years, so half of my life, that I'm talking about anti-Blackness for a long chunk of my life, that there is a desire in me, and I'm sure amongst other Black folks, to be doing something else. I would love to be thinking about whether or not children are going to be in this decade or not. I would love to be thinking about the next step of my career. I would love to think about what is the sort of ways that I can imagine my future. But at any time that you're allowed that moment to do so, the regularly occurring crises that happen every couple of years, whether it's a health crisis or a police crisis or a public health crisis, they disproportionately impact you. Therefore, you're forced to respond. So I think that this sort of short Any of us who've been here and have heard these stories again and again and again know that it's a short window. It is, let's be honest. There's a crack where publicly we're having conversations about Blackness, and then that window will happen for however long it needs to happen, and then it'll shut down, and then it'll go dormant for a while. And the rest of us who are doing our work in the community will continue to talk about it. We'll continue to think about how to implement these sort of things. But I had to sort of remind myself, you know, as an organizer and an activist, you want to be countercultural. There's a sense of like desire to push, but I think there is cause for optimism when fringe ideas become public discourse. There is, abolitionist groups have been talking about alternatives to policing and the options of defunding police for decades. But to see whether it's performative or not, to see a sort of public discourse on a real public discourse on the possibilities of defunding the police and refunding it in social services, as was recently just approved in LA yesterday to reallocate $100 to $150 million in the police budget towards resources and support for communities of color. That was not even possible 5 years ago, right? That was not even possible 3-4 years ago. So I think that I thinking of my ancestors, thinking of Toussaint Louverture, thinking of the sort of stuff that was not possible for my people, the time for bold imagination, the time for things that were never seemed possible, and the times to finally stop talking about these things, to get the things that we've wanted is if there's any time to do it, it be now. And I think that sort of framework is where my sort of mindset is at around this moment. And the last bit is around how to build resilience. I mean, to be honest with you, I think that I struggle with that answer because, like everyone else, to be Black and gay at this moment is a sort of it's trippy, right? And while there are societal issues that are happening, to also have to contend with the real life tangible realities from COVID, the sort of, how do I keep myself safe? How do I keep people around me safe? How do I care for people around me? Balancing both of those is incredibly difficult. I guess one of the things that I've really, that I have sort of taken on and are adopting, and I find helpful to adopt, is imagining we can show up in this moment for each other in so many different ways, and that Black folks are in crisis and are in pain right now. So the ways that we can show up doesn't necessarily have to mean on the streets. That is a tactic and a choice that I choose, and that I believe is important, but it's not necessarily the only way that we can show up for Black people. So care work to me is also resistance work. Thinking about what are the structures and systems that we need for immediate communities. And we know how to do that best, right? Like we create our own sort of care communities, whether it's the ballroom community or some of the activist communities that are created where people are mutually doing care, economic support, ways that we can come through and show up for each other. If you're pro-protesters, go out and support the protesters. If you're Black and anti the protesters, then help the Black business owners rebuild. At the end of the day, support Black folks any way you can. Mentorship, I can't understate this enough, how important that is as part of resistance, and how that has really deeply impacted my organizing and activism, the ways that we call them our OGs. Our OGs have come through and provided mentorship and support in so many different ways. As the more that I'm living on this earth, the more that I'm realizing that this every couple of years or so, the same conversations about to be had. And so getting that sort of historical elder perspective, I find really important. I come from a country that is deeply elder focused, and living here in the West is the opposite. So it feels oftentimes as a young man, you feel untethered. So I think that those mentorship, dreaming up of of alternative realities, economic support, care work. All of those are ways that we can resist and show up for each other at this time. But I think that the first thing is to sort of show up for ourselves. And I think it's easy to say Black Lives Matter as a concept, but if I'm not practicing that, if I'm not putting in practices that recognizes that my own individual life matters, right? If a plane crash is going, they tell you put your mask first before you put anybody else's. You need to ensure your own safety as a way of being able to be there for people. I think that sort of, to me, that's how I build resilience, resilience for myself. But I ain't gonna lie, it's a work in progress. It's a struggle sometimes. It's a work in progress. I think I'm gonna leave it at that because I've ranted for a while. But I want to also thank everyone. I want to thank the Black Gay Men's Network, and it was so nice to actually be able to. I enjoy going third, so I can just sit and listen to folks and take it in. So thank you to the two of you for your thoughtful words.
You know what? Can you hear? I wanted to
Yes.
say something really quick because I know I have to get off this conversation. One of the conversations that I actually have been having through other Zoom conversations here in New York around Black gay men is sex. Here in New York, you know, we've been in quarantine for 3 months, and listening to Black gay men saying they're going crazy around sex, or roommates having fights and arguments because one roommate is supposed to be in quarantine and the other one is still on Grindr trying to get a date and bring a date home and still doing what they have to do. And having this conversation with young people around what does the future look like with us having to wear the mask and the gloves, and what does sex look like in those conversations. And so just wanted to kind of toss that out there, that those conversations are starting to be had as well as people talk about the new norm. And we're still dealing with making sure people wear a condom or protect themselves or are taking PrEP and using and all these other things. Now we have to start talking about masks and gloves and how do we contend with isolation and protecting ourselves as well around sex as a Black gay man.
Thank you. Thank you so much, GB, Rodney, and Lee. This has been amazing presentations, and now we want to open it up to continue the dialogue. You know, I have to say, as someone who has lived through the sort of cultural renaissance of the late 80s and 90s in response in Black gay communities to HIV, you've all sort of reminded me that this is maybe this could be another moment for us to sort of imagine. We did a lot of thinking about relationships at that time and how we wanted to relate to each other and what that meant and the importance of that and how we maybe wanted to imagine that differently. We had many people, not all Black gay men, but Audre Lorde, now I'm spacing on everybody, but there are just lots of folks that pulled down my books that were imagining relationships. So I think that's a really important point too. As we think about economic structures, as we think about care work, as we think about taking care of each other, I think we also have to use this moment to rethink our relationships with each other, kind of the sex and the intimacy that we want, and that how we might imagine that differently, sort of free of the kind of violence that could be tearing apart those relationships. The kind of ways that we can talk, the kind of ways that maybe we imagine relating across generations and within generations. I think that's particularly an issue here in Toronto, where oftentimes it feels like so many of our communities are fragmented. We have lots of different communities. It's not that we don't have communities. That's not the point. It's just we have a lot of different ones and they're not always connected. So I'm wondering what you all are thinking. I'm talking Marlon Riggs. I'm talking about, anyway, I can't believe I spaced on all that. Thank you. So what are you all thinking? Could you put some questions in the chat? And if our panelists have any things they want to talk. I have one question here about what should our community organizations be doing in this moment to respond and serve our populations of Black gay men and more broadly, I guess, Black communities? Does anybody want to, GB or?
Yeah, I can jump in there. There is something that I carry all through my life. Every time I think about what can I do, and it's bloom where you're planted. Everyone is in different situations. You're in different organizations. You do different, like all sorts of different kind of work. The reality is all of those systems need work for our lives. So there can be work that can be done there. A lot of people like to think about activism as just focusing on being out there, protesting, raising your voice. Yes, that's absolutely important. The reality is not everybody is equipped to do that. Not everybody has the energy to do that. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of emotional labor. So it's important to look around you where you are and figure out what those problems are. What can you do? You know, for me, as someone who was raised in a Black majority country, I didn't grow up in a society that devalued my life. So I don't have a lot of those sort of traumas that have been passed down through generations. And I have to acknowledge that for myself, but I know that because of that, I now have privileges that have afforded me to get to where I am. So now it's how do I bloom where I am and do the work that needs to be done. So I would consider myself an academic activist, and that's my version of it. I'm looking at the systems that a lot of people use to oppress us, you know, research, education. How can we make those changes in those spaces right now? And, you know, everybody's making all these public statements, all these organizations are making all these public statements, denouncing racism, denouncing anti-Black racism and all that. This is the time to then say, we're gonna hold you accountable what you said. These are your words. So think about the people who are around you, who you can work with to start tackling some of those issues. It takes work. It takes a lot of self-reflection as well. It takes a lot of learning on your own part. Like, I can't say, you know, 5 years ago, I knew enough as much as I do right now, but that takes time. It takes some time to do the work, learn the critical race theory, understand how systems operate. And if you don't know that stuff, look it up. And then you can start having some of these conversations. But my comment to that would be bloom where you're planted. There's a lot of work that can be done. And people seem to be ready, at least to show up in public to say that they're doing it. So now we can hold them accountable to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Bloom where you're planted. I really like that. I think that there's just two specifics that right away the question makes me think of. I think there is the sort of, right when COVID happened, a lot of community organizations, rightfully so, were quick to respond with like immediate support, immediate sort of new systems, new programs, new ways of providing support. And that was, the most of those were launched in a rapid response way to respond to the sort of immediacy of the moment. I think it's now we're all in our collective consciousness, recognizing that we're going to be in this moment for much longer than we all imagined. So I think as what I'm not seeing from community organizations are sort of like short, medium term and long term supports that can be provided. So not just emergency support funding right now, but how do we support those of us who don't have a literal, like who are in phase 4 of opening, as Liam mentioned, whose workplaces literally will not open this year? How do we support folks who have housing, who are going to be facing housing shortfalls coming up in the year? I think that I had a conversation with some arts organizations who were asking the same question around how they can support folks. And because everyone's situation is so nuanced, I also think it's really important to take the time right now, while we recognize this is going to be a long term, to think about how we can truncate a consultation process of sorts. So the first phase of support likely was done just out of response to the moment, but to actually truly accurately gauge what the supports of your community needs, you need to hear from your community in a way. But the bureaucracies of a consultation, consultations oftentimes they might not yield the sort of results that you want. So I think it's how can we innovate and truncate that sort of process to make it work in this moment? How can we formalize it? If you have a base in an audience and you call 50 people and you do a phone chain just to ask them 2 basic questions, that will yield you probably more results of more tangible, salient solutions on how people need support rather than making assumptions. And then, I mean, it bears to repeat that a lot of the folks doing a lot of the frontline work right now in community tend to be volunteers. Both in activist circles, but also in care circles, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of volunteer organizing is happening. So if you have access to a budget, it's a real reallocating and figuring out whatever group you vibe with, whichever individual you vibe with, whichever collective you vibe with, or that aligns with your organization, what are the resources that your organization have that you can funnel? What are the resources that that are easy for you to direct, to volunteer, to grassroots radical organizing? I think is important. In my history as a volunteer organizer, it's often been those organizational supports that keep you afloat. And it's things like offering to support food for X number. It's like down to like trucks, transportation, contracts, connections. Even we've had organizations lend us researchers or lend us their staff that right now need workload to support in website projects or design projects or whatnot. Their organizations have a lot of resources that volunteer organizing bodies just do not have. And that if there is an organization that you align with, whether it's a protest organization or the Toronto Kiki Ballroom Alliance or a care circle, an activist care circle, whatever it is, I think it's time for us to start taking the resources out of our big institutions and putting them out to the people on the front lines that are, to be honest with you, that are out, not sleeping, taking a lot of hits for you and I to have this Zoom call right now.
Lee, do you have anything you wanted to respond to?
Well, I want to say, obviously, I'm sure that there's differences for me here in New York and United States. I can't really necessarily speak to, I don't know what grassroots or organizations necessarily look through and what you are allowed and not allowed to do there in Canada. I'm going to speak for myself and my organization. I think that what I have been doing is I've become to be like that central source that people tend to contact or email or ask questions to, and I turn around and I use my resources to connect people. So people that are dealing with, like say, the coronavirus and their homes, some people that cannot walk and get out of their houses, we have talked to what other organization has a network who's doing care packages and not just food, but sending them stuff like toilet paper and soap and Lysol spray and all these different things that they need, creating care packages and stuff, and how we can get them to people. Like you just, Rodney was just saying, around trucks and vans and stuff and how to get around. Again, I was blessed that I have my own network of people that took care of me. I started thinking about outside of that, how about all of the people that can't? One of the things we also started to try to initiate was wellness checks. Call 2 friends and have those 2 friends call someone, and everyone start making those wellness checks and saying, are you okay? Do you need anything? Believe it or not, those things are so important, because sometimes a lot of people don't necessarily want to contact an organization in that time. They may feel more comfortable to a confidant or a close friend to say, you know what, I'm going through such and such and I need such and such. And then maybe those people might contact an organization, say, I know I need someone. And I'll give you another example. So I have someone that I'm not gonna speak their name, but was getting out of, they just tested positive. They've been in the hospital now for a week with coronavirus, and they are about to be released. And where they were living, the 2 people that they're living with are negative, right? So he's positive. They are scared for him to come back there because they're scared that he will now infect them. And so he calls and says, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm about to be homeless. They're trying to release me out of the hospital. What do I do? And now I start getting on the phone and finding out, well, what organization does emergency housing? Where is there emergency housing for people that are homeless or about to be homeless, for those that have the coronavirus? And so it's those type of things of trying to find out within our networks. Some organizations are doing some things and some organizations aren't, and finding out who is doing what and how to connect people to the help they need. If it is, you know, a person that's calling me saying, I am having a mental breakdown, I can't take it no more, this is what I'm tired of feeling like I have no value, no worth. You start to feel like this person needs to have a conversation, and I can be there, but I also know that I'm not a therapist, and maybe they need someone, they need more than just a person to just listen. They might need someone that they can really talk to them and give them more specific help to what's really actually going on with them. So there's a lot of connecting people to places and organizations that can help. And that's really deep. I'm going to take a second to say that, because I think here in New York, I often hear a lot of people feel like their church, their family, if you feel like everyone around you treats you like you are an abomination, you're an abomination to God, you're an abomination, you should not be who you are. Living in your truth, being gay is an issue for you. And now these things are happening and you're feeling like you now need to put yourself in a place that makes you unsafe. This is when I start to see young people or gay men do things that put themselves at risk because they feel like I don't have any value anyway. No one values me anywhere. And how do you ask people that feel or are told or constantly told that you have no value to wear a condom, that you have no value, go put on a mask and stay in the house. So it's these type of things that are the challenges that we have around Black gay men realizing you are value and to save yourselves. And how do we then step outside of ourselves to help each other within those networks?
Can I ask a question related to that? Is I'm wondering, taking this moment, I mean, are the ways that we respond and the ways we want to imagine, do we do that as collectives of Black gay men? Or are we doing that in the context of other sort of networks that may not just be sort of Black gay men? I'm thinking also about this as sort of there was a moment, sort of, again, sort of going back to the late 80s and 90s, where there are a lot of, and even before sort of HIV hit, there are a lot of Black gay men's collectives that came up, right? That then turned into our HIV organizations. But I'm thinking like an organization like Gay Men of African Descent that was not originally focused around HIV. It was a sort of health, Black gay men, sort of well-being, more broad.
It was a group that men got together and had these conversations.
Right. Or like Second Sunday in Atlanta, or like Adoti Muse, I think that was based in sort of Philadelphia. There are lots of these different groups, but one of the things that I notice or I'm thinking about is the way we're responding now is not necessarily through collectives of Black gay men. And maybe that's of a different era. But I'm also, all three of you have spoke about us sort of responding and sort of drawing on our networks and sort of figuring out ways to sort of even imagine our relationships. I'm wondering whether or not and how sort of collectives of Black gay men come into that imagination, or if it's something different, if we're in a different moment about that.
I'd like to say that something really quick about that. We are definitely in a different time. We relied more on our network. We had to go into spaces to be with each other. This generation doesn't. You have a cell phone. You have the power of the world in your hand. You don't necessarily, young generations don't have the same respect for a GMAD or a GMHC until they need services, right? So I do groups called Perspectives, and getting people to come out and have these intergenerational conversations. Today, you know how important that is, to be able to sit into a space and look someone in the eye and have a real conversation and feel the emotion, when today a lot of people are like, you know, Can we do it Facebook Live? You know, like we're doing right now. Can we, you know, how can I get on with my cell phone? We don't necessarily have the same connections until, you know, people don't necessarily walk into a lot of our community-based organizations. That's why here in New York, all of them that are Black led, almost all of them have closed because the support for them are not there. The services are not there. The money is not there to sustain them, is not there. So it's a hard conversation to have because it is a different generation. We did not have cell phones. We relied on being able to sit down and go to a space. The Friday night forums that you just said about GMAD, that was important for us to go to the center every Friday, because that's how we connected with each other and we found out things and we talked, and you don't have to do that today. You just don't. You could just Google it from your phone. So yes, it's amazing that we have this new technology and how the new technology can connect us around the world. And I'm having this conversation with you guys over in Canada. But even though we're connected, we're still also kind of isolated, because I don't have to leave my house now to have those conversations, where we were forced to get out and have some kind of brotherhood with each other and look out for each other. The feel of that is very, very different today than what I grew up with in the 80s and the 90s, you know.
I think that's a valid point, Lee, you know, but I wonder if, because of what's happening with COVID, you might see a resurgence of the need for these spaces. It's sort of that idea is you don't know what you have until it's gone. Because I honestly, like, I can't wait to get back in the club. Like, it's something that you miss when you don't get it anymore. So I wonder if people are going to start looking. What are you talking about, Liz? I'm just saying, like, I wonder if people are going to start needing these in-person connections again, because now we're all craving that physical, that personal connection over all this internet stuff, because we've been inundated with it all the time. I've been on like 3 Zoom calls today, you know? So I think there might be something coming up in the water.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm just being hopeful.
No, I think you're right. I think that there is the possibility for that change, because we have been so isolated and forced so with these lockdowns and these quarantines happening. I do find that people are having these conversations that they are missing those spaces. Unfortunately, I feel like here in New York, I'm going to speak about where I live, some of it may be a little bit too late because we have lost those spaces, or the money for those organizations to sustain themselves until the situation is over. It's gone. Even nightlife here in New York, you know, young generation, they have choices that we didn't have. We had to go to the bar and club to meet each other. We didn't have all the options that, you know, we didn't have Grindr and Gaydar and all the other things that the young people use today. You know, we had to go out to the club and stuff. So,
and the parks.
And so, okay, you got it. Now, I ain't gonna talk about it. So I heard. But at the end of the day, you understand what I'm saying. We still had that in-person thing that we had to meet. So today, you know, the conversation about, I could swipe left, or I can get on a website and do all these things. Everything has become so impersonal that it is changed. And like you just said, you don't know what you got until it's gone. But is it a little bit too late? Because those spaces, times have changed. Things are happening. Things are moving away from that. So, you know, how do you social distance now in a nightclub? How is that going to work? How are they going to have these spaces, these bars, meet their bar guarantees to sustain their licenses and stuff if they're told to have a 25% capacity in those spaces? It's not going to work. They're going to choose, they'd rather close and do another business than to try to sustain something for the community. It's going to be very difficult.
Wow. As always, it feels like this is an opening to so many things, not coming to an end, but we're kind of coming to the end of the time, and we've really just scratched the surface. Garfield?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna first of all, I want to all of us to thank again our speakers, GB and Rodney and Lee. It was amazing, amazing. And you've given me a lot to think about and a lot to act on. Not just think about in these times, like think and act. And I hope that we'll stay connected. I hope, you know, I'm from New York City, so I know when the border opens back up that I'll be back. But I hope we stay connected in other ways. All of you, I hope that we can, you know, not let some of the physical distancing and the social distancing we have, you know, really keep us apart. So I'm gonna hand it over to Garfield, who's gonna do a bit of a closing for us and talk about any next steps that we might have.
Yeah. Again, thank you, everyone. My name is Garfield Durant. I'm the Men's Prevention Coordinator with the Black Coalition for AIDS Prevention, Black CAP. Again, you know, really rich conversation today. I just want to say on behalf of the Black Gay Men's Network and the Planning Committee, we want to thank you for attending today's session. We believe that our diverse and dynamic group of panelists have really provided really in-depth insight as well as actionable and practical tools of engagement going forward. We know that the current circumstances that we live in are really unknown to us, and they really bring a lot of uncertainties and new challenges that also comes with them. A big thank you to our amazing panelists, GB, Rodney, and Lee, for really contributing their perspectives. It is really helpful to hear your perspectives and your viewpoints in order to better serve or to better do the work that we need to do as part of engaging with the community. Also, we want to thank the participants for their questions, their comments, and also the suggestions. It was really a time spent really hearing your feedback and discussing ideas through a constructive conversation on this really heavy subject matter. And we want to assure you that, you know, going forward, all the considerations, all the things that we, you know, all the points that have been brought forward, we're looking forward to create, you know, future events that will be able to bring more of those conversations in place. Because I mean, we're just scratching the surface. Today, we just really started this conversation, and there's a lot of things that have been surfacing. But again, it's a start for us, and we want to make sure that we continue this conversation. So we want to say, you know, looking forward for the next steps, we'll be, you know, bringing forward other discussions and also bringing forward, you know, other panelists and other people within the community who also be bringing their perspectives and also sharing, you know, their thoughts and their views around how we can better strengthen the work that we're doing or the work that we want to do within our community. And I'm confident that together we can build on this momentum as we continue to grow and find new ways as a community to address Black gay men's needs and concerns. And we collectively live and breathe this vision today. Like we see that, you know, based on the conversations that we've been having, and also, you know, based on the feedback that we've been getting from our participants. As a part of the reflection of today's conversation, I want you to remember that, you know, alone we are strong, but together we're stronger. And as we go through this moment, I want for us to just keep that in mind and recognize that as a community, you know, once we're together, we got this. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just checking. How do those of us who are not in Ontario connect? I think that's important too, because, you know, some of us are out here on the West Coast. You know, we gotta connect somehow. So.
Yeah, you know, I mean, maybe we want to. I think. By the way, there was and there is an organizing committee. It included Garfield Durant, myself. I'm sort of independent, but I'm also an associate professor at University of Toronto. We have Eric, who's at Gay Men's Sexual Health Network.
Alliance.
What? Alliance, sorry. Eric is always correcting me. We have Davan and Kwesi, who are part of Black Gay Men's Network of Ontario, and as well as Franz.
Neef
Niemans, who is also at Black Coalition for AIDS Prevention, as well, in addition to Garfield, and Gareth, who's the executive director. So I think, you know, this is partly a way for us to sort of open up a space and see if there's a need and if folks want to do that, so that we're going to do this again. So, and we'll figure out a way. I think one way is to definitely connect through Black Gay Men's Network Ontario. You don't have to be living in Ontario, but you should check their page. You should sort of go there. You should also go to Black Cap's sort of website. There are already some existing sort of discussion groups. I think there's, there's Black Lives Matter Toronto. I think there are different ways to connect, but I think we're going to, after this, go back and think about if there are other ways where we want to bring this sort of formation together in the future. So thanks, GB, for that suggestion.
Hey, Lance,
Yeah.
we should stay back just for the committee members for like 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. So thanks, everyone. This is formally, and thank you for bringing it to a close. And we will hopefully talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Rodney. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, GB.
Yeah.
GB, I would be in
Thank you.
touch with you, though.
Yeah, remember me this time, Eric. I'm not going to let that pass. I'm not going to let that pass. What's happening? All right. See you later.
Thank you, GB and Lee. I appreciate y'all. Thank you for having
Thanks,
me.
Rodney.
Thanks, Rodney.
Bye. Stay safe,
Thanks,
y'all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Rodney. Yeah.
Stay safe. Take care. Be
How do I
well.
leave this?
Lance, who is that?
Huh?
There's somebody but it's not you there.
No, I'm here.
I seen a Lance.
Just remember that it's also streaming on Facebook, so we also need to disconnect the Facebook
Oh,
stream.
and that's crazy.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
why
please.
sometimes. I don't know why sometimes it has my name down there.
Neve has the, oh, sorry, go
1
on.
minute, guys. Shutting it down.
All right,
Okay,
thank you.
thanks, Neve.